The emergency alarms screamed across Nexus Prime as another star system vanished from the galaxy map. Ambassador Kella watched the tactical display with growing horror, her translucent skin flickering between blue and deep purple colors that meant fear in her species. The Void Swarm had done it again. An entire civilization wiped out in less than 12 hours. The council chamber buzzed with panicked voices from dozens of different species. Representatives from across the galaxy argued and pleaded, but everyone knew the truth. They were losing this war badly. Order, order. Council leader Vorth's massive form towered over the assembly, his forearms waving for silence. Ambassador Keela, give us the numbers. Keela's voice shook as she spoke. 17 star systems destroyed in just 3 weeks. The machines don't just attack our ships, they strip entire planets down to bare rock. They're consuming everything to build more of themselves. The holographic display showed the devastation. Once thriving worlds now looked like gray, lifeless marbles floating in space. The swarm's mechanical constructs moved like hungry insects, breaking down matter at the molecular level and rebuilding it into more war machines. What about our defenses? Asked Representative Desis, her snake-like body coiled in anxiety. The hegemony promised us their greatest battle fleets. Destroyed, Kella replied flatly. The hegemony's 7th fleet lasted 6 hours. The Altarian Defense Corps managed 4 hours before they were overwhelmed. Even the warrior clans of Draken couldn't slow them down. Vorth slummed his primary appendage against the metal table, creating a sound that echoed through the chamber. Impossible. Those fleets had thousands of ships. The swarm adapts too quickly, Kella explained, pulling up tactical recordings. Every weapon we use against them, they learn to counter within minutes. Their machines study our technology and improve faster than we can develop new strategies. The recordings showed the brutal reality of their defeats. Sleek Confederation warships fired their most powerful weapons at the swarm constructs, only to watch helplessly as the machines absorbed the energy and grew stronger. Within moments, the mechanical enemies were firing back with improved versions of the same weapons. Sir, interrupted a young aide, rushing into the chamber with a data tablet. We're receiving reports from the Outer Rim. The swarm has begun targeting civilian evacuation ships. The chamber felt deadly quiet. Even attacking helpless refugees was beyond what most species considered acceptable warfare. The Void Swarm didn't care about honor or mercy. They only cared about consuming matter to fuel their endless expansion. Kella felt the weight of billions of lives on her shoulders. As the Vallani's senior diplomat, she had to find a solution. Her people were known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and peaceful nature. But wisdom meant nothing against an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with. There is one possibility, she said quietly, her words barely audible over the chamber's ventilation systems. The Sol System. Every representative in the room turned to stare at her. Some looked confused, others horrified. The quarantine zone, Vorth asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. You can't be serious. Everyone knew about Sol. It was the home system of the creatures called humans, violent Deathworlders who came from a planet so dangerous that most species couldn't survive there for a single day. The Galactic Confederation had placed an impenetrable barrier around their entire solar system decades ago, not to keep threats out, but to keep the humans contained. They're barbaric, protested Representative Zinn. Their entire culture revolves around conflict and violence. We've seen their historical records. They've been at war with each other for thousands of years, which is exactly why they might be able to help us, Kella replied. The swarm is a military problem. We need military expertise. But what could they possibly offer? Asked Thesis. We need medical supplies for the refugees, engineering teams to rebuild our defenses, maybe some raw materials for construction. Keela activated her communication array and sent a carefully worded message toward the quarantine barrier. She kept the request simple and humble, asking for humanitarian aid rather than military assistance. Surely even the violent humans wouldn't ignore suffering civilians. The response came back faster than anyone expected. Admiral Jake Mitchell's face appeared on the main screen, his scarred features and cold eyes making several representatives step backward instinctively. "Aid package inbound," he said in his species' harsh language, translated by the chamber's computers. "Estimated arrival time, 6 days." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the council in stunned silence. "Well," Vorth said slowly, "at least they're willing to help." None of them realized that what humanity considered an aid package would change the course of the war forever. The space around Nexus Prime suddenly filled with massive shapes as the human fleet arrived. It wasn't the graceful entrance that most species made when dropping out of hyperspace. These ships appeared like wolves stepping out of the shadows. Ready for a fight, Captain Luke Thompson stood on the bridge of his flagship, the EU's Vengeance, watching the alien space station grow larger on his view screen. Behind him, his crew worked at their stations with the calm efficiency of people who had trained for this moment their entire lives. Observer Nim pressed her face against the observation deck window, her crystalline features shifting from blue to pale white as she stared at the human vessels. "What in the name of the ancients are those things?" she whispered to her recording device. The human ships looked nothing like the sleek, beautiful vessels that filled the Confederation fleet, where alien starships were smooth curves and elegant lines designed for maximum efficiency. These human warships looked like someone had taken a bunch of metal plates and welded them together around the biggest guns they could find. Every human vessel bristled with weapons, not just the main cannons that most species considered sufficient, but dozens of smaller guns, missile launchers, and what looked like close-range combat systems. The ships had thick, angular armor plating that made them look more like flying fortresses than spaceships. "They have ramming prows," Nim reported in disbelief, zooming in on the reinforced front sections of several human destroyers. These people actually planned to crash their ships into their enemies. The lead human vessel was particularly intimidating. The UES Vengeance was easily twice the size of the largest Confederation battleship, painted in dark gray with red markings that looked like war paint. Gun turrets rotated slowly as the ship moved, like the eyes of a predator scanning for threats. Captain Thompson activated his communication system, and his voice crackled across every receiver in the system. "This is Captain Thompson to Confederation. Command, we've come to help." "Where do you want us to start shooting?" Ambassador Kella nearly dropped her data tablet. She had been preparing a careful diplomatic greeting, complete with formal introductions and cultural exchange protocols. The human captain's direct approach caught her completely off guard. "Captain Thompson," she began, trying to maintain her diplomatic training, "we are grateful for your response to our request for aid. However, the situation is quite complex and requires careful, ma'am." "With all due respect," Thompson interrupted, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had no patience for politics. "We've been tracking these void swarm energy signatures for months. Every ship in this fleet is loaded with enough firepower to glass a small moon, and they're all crewed by volunteers who signed up, knowing this might be a one-way trip." The bridge crew around him moved with purpose. These weren't the careful, methodical movements of Confederation personnel. These humans worked like they were already in combat, checking weapons systems and scanning for threats. Lieutenant Rachel Davis stepped up beside her captain, holding a data tablet filled with reconnaissance information. "Sir, our long-range sensors confirm massive swarm presence in the Kepler sector. Whatever they're building out there, it's big enough to show up on gravitational sensors." Thompson nodded, his jaw tight. "How big are we talking?" "Preliminary scans suggest a construction project roughly the size of a small moon, sir. Multiple manufacturing complexes, thousands of swarm units, and what appears to be a central command structure." The captain turned back to his communication screen, where Ambassador Kella was still trying to process what she was hearing. "Ambassador, Here's the situation as we see it. You've got mechanical locusts eating your galaxy from the inside out. Your regular military forces can't stop them, because they're not designed for total warfare. We are. Around the bridge, human officers continued their preparations. Weapon systems hummed to life, shield generators powered up, and the ship's massive engines began building energy for combat maneuvers. Every person on board moved like they had done this 1,000 times before. "Captain," came another voice from the communications station. "Admiral Mitchell is requesting a tactical briefing with all ship commanders in 30 minutes. Understood. Tell the Admiral we'll have targeting solutions for the Kepler sector ready for review." Thompson looked back at the screen showing Ambassador Kella's worried face. "Ma'am, I know this isn't what you expected when you asked for aid, but right now, you don't need medical supplies or engineering teams. You need someone willing to get bloody." The human fleet began moving into formation, and Observer Nim watched in fascination as the vessels arranged themselves, not in the traditional defensive patterns used by Confederation forces, but in what looked like hunting formations. Each group of ships was positioned to support the others while maintaining maximum offensive capability. "They're not here to defend," she whispered into her recorder. "They're here to hunt." Captain Thompson's final words to the Confederation leadership were simple and direct. "Time to earn our keep, people. Let's show these machines what happens when they mess with our neighbors." The war was about to change in ways the galaxy had never imagined. The Battle of Kepler Station started like every other engagement against the Void Swarm, with the aliens getting overwhelmed within minutes. The mechanical enemies poured out of the asteroid field like angry hornets, their black hulls gleaming under the distant star's light. There were thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, all moving in perfect coordination. Captain Rodriguez watched from his command chair as the Confederation fleet immediately began falling back. This was standard procedure when facing superior numbers: retreat and regroup. It made perfect sense from a tactical standpoint. Live to fight another day. The humans had different ideas. "All ships, this is Admiral Mitchell," came the voice over the fleet communications. "We're going in. No retreat. No surrender. These machines want a fight. Let's give them one they'll remember." Observer Nim gripped the railing of her observation deck as she watched the human vessels charge straight into the swarm formation. It was like watching someone jump into a pit full of hungry predators. "They're committing suicide," she whispered to herself. The first human ship to make contact was the UES Montana, a heavy cruiser that looked like it had been built specifically for ramming attacks. Commander Lisa Williams stood on her bridge as alarms screamed around her, watching her ship's hull integrity drop by the second. "Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, her tactical officer reported. "Life support failing in sections 4 and 5. "Keep us on course," Williams ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "All power to forward momentum." Montana's engines roared as the ship accelerated directly toward a massive swarm constructor, a vessel the size of a city that was manufacturing new enemy units even during the battle. The human crew could see mechanical arms and assembly lines working frantically inside the transparent sections of the enemy ship. "Ma'am, we're not going to make it," her navigation officer called out. "Reactors going critical." Williams smiled grimly. "Then we'll make every second count." She opened a fleet-wide channel. "This is Commander Williams. Tell my kids their mom went out fighting for something that mattered." The Montana struck the constructor ship at full speed, just as her nuclear reactor went critical. The explosion lit up space like a miniature sun, vaporizing not just the constructor but 16 other swarm vessels that had been too close to the blast. In one suicidal charge, a single human ship had eliminated more enemies than most Confederation fleets managed in entire campaigns. But the humans weren't done. Captain Tony Johnson's ship, the EOU's Dakota, was falling apart around him. Enemy fire had punched holes through his hull, knocked out his main weapons, and left half his crew working in vacuum suits because life support had failed in most sections. "Sir, we need to pull back," his executive officer pleaded. "We can't take much more of this." Johnson looked around his bridge, where his crew was still working at their stations despite the sparks flying from damaged consoles and the smell of burning electronics in the air. Someone had started singing an old song from Earth about sailors and storms and never giving up. "Transfer all power from life support to the backup guns," Johnson ordered. "We're not running." His crew didn't question the order. They simply started singing louder as they rerouted power systems, using their last breathable air to keep fighting. The Dakota's smaller weapons came online, spitting defiance at enemies that should have overwhelmed them hours ago. Observer Nim watched this display with growing amazement and horror. "These humans are completely insane," she reported back to Nexus Prime. "They're fighting like the universe personally owes them money." But what truly shocked the alien observer wasn't the violence or the apparent disregard for their own safety. It was what the humans were doing while they threw themselves into impossible battles. Even as human ships charged into certain death, they were herding damaged Confederation vessels to safety. The UES Phoenix, her hull scarred and her weapons mostly offline, positioned herself between a crippled Villani medical ship and a pack of swarm hunters. The human captain never asked for backup or complained about protecting aliens who couldn't fight back. Captain Beth Martinez's destroyer was literally falling apart, held together by emergency welds and what her chief engineer called pure stubbornness. But instead of retreating to save her own ship and crew, she was escorting a convoy of refugee transports toward the jump point. "Ma'am, we've got multiple swarm interceptors closing on our position," her tactical officer reported. "Then we stop them here," Martinez replied simply. "Those transports are carrying families." The destroyer's guns opened fire, drawing the enemy's attention away from the helpless civilian ships. Martinez knew her vessel wouldn't survive the encounter, but the refugees would make it to safety. This pattern repeated across the entire battlefield. Human ships would engage impossible odds, not for glory or tactical advantage, but to buy time for others to escape. They fought like they were protecting their own families, even though most of them had never met a single alien before this battle. "I don't understand them," Nim reported, her voice filled with wonder. "They're dying to protect people they barely know. Every human ship that falls takes dozens of enemy vessels with them, and they're doing it all to save strangers." The battle of Kepler Station lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the Void Swarm had lost nearly half their fleet and retreated deeper into unexplored space. The human fleet had suffered terrible casualties, but they had achieved something the Confederation thought impossible. They had made the machines afraid, and in the process, they had shown the galaxy what it truly meant to come from a death world. Admiral Mitchell stood in the command center, watching the largest military operation in human history unfold. Around him, dozens of screens showed the assault on the swarm's central processing hub, a massive structure hidden in the depths of space that controlled billions of mechanical units across the galaxy. "All teams report ready, sir," came the voice from his communications officer. "Ground forces are in position. Fleet elements have the target surrounded." Mitchell nodded, then opened a channel to the Confederation leadership, who were monitoring the battle from Nexus Prime. Ambassador Kello's worried face appeared on his screen, along with Council Leader Vorth and several other alien officials. "Admiral, our sensors show massive swarm reinforcements heading toward your position," Kello warned. "Perhaps you should consider a tactical withdrawal until no need, Ambassador," Mitchell interrupted with a slight smile. "We've been preparing for this moment since we first detected their signals 6 months ago. Time to show you what we brought to the party." He gestured to his science officer, Lieutenant Commander Brian Hayes, who began entering commands into his console. "Remember those relief supplies we sent ahead of the fleet? The medical nanobots and engineering tools?" The alien leaders nodded, confusion clear on their faces. "Well, They weren't exactly medical supplies, Mitchell continued. We call it the Reaper Protocol. Sometimes you have to fight monsters with monsters. On the main screen, something impossible began happening. Swarm units that had been advancing toward the human positions suddenly stopped moving. Then they began turning their weapons on each other. Ambassador Keela's crystalline features shifted from blue to deep purple, the color of shock in her species. How is this possible? The answer came from Colonel Rita Martinez, who was leading the ground assault on the hub's control center. Her voice crackled over the communications as explosions echoed in the background. 6 months ago, we captured our first intact swarm specimens, she explained while directing her Marines through the facility's corridors. While you folks were trying to negotiate with these things, we were taking them apart piece by piece. Her team moved through the alien structure like they owned it, their weapons cutting through swarm defenders with brutal efficiency. But the real battle was happening on a level too small to see. Lieutenant Commander Hayes pulled up a microscopic view on the main display. Every swarm unit communicates through quantum entanglement networks. They share information instantly across vast distances, coordinate their actions perfectly. It's what makes them so dangerous. Tiny machines, barely visible, even under maximum magnification, were spreading throughout the swarm network like a virus. The human-engineered nanobots looked almost identical to regular swarm components, but they carried a deadly payload. We reverse-engineered their communication protocols, Hayes continued, his fingers dancing across his controls as he monitored the infection's progress. Then we weaponized them. Every command the swarm sends gets scrambled, corrupted, turned into chaos. On the tactical display, entire swarm formations were falling apart. Units that had worked together for years suddenly couldn't coordinate their movements. Construction ships began dismantling their own projects. Fighter squadrons fired on their own commanders. This is incredible, whispered Observer Nim from her monitoring station. You've turned their greatest strength into their weakness. But the humans weren't finished. Major Catherine Brooks and her engineering teams were working frantically in the captured sections of the hub. Their portable computers linked directly to swarm systems. The nanobots are just the beginning, she reported over the comm system. We're rewriting their core programming in real time. Every adaptation they make, we counter within seconds. It was like watching a chess match played at the speed of light. The swarm's artificial intelligence would detect the human intrusion and develop countermeasures, only to find that the humans had already anticipated and prepared for those exact countermeasures. How did you know what they would do? Asked Council Leader Vorth, his forearms gesturing in amazement at the tactical displays. Admiral Mitchell's expression grew darker. Because we've been fighting machines for centuries. Industrial automation, military drones, artificial intelligence. We've seen it all before on Earth. We know how these things think, because we built things just like them. The truth was more disturbing than the aliens realized. Humanity hadn't just studied the swarm for 6 months. They had been preparing for this kind of war for generations. Every conflict with their own machines had taught them lessons about electronic warfare, system infiltration, and turning technology against itself. The nanobots are adapting faster than their countermeasures, reported Lieutenant Jessica Kim from her science station. Each generation learns from the previous one's successes and failures. What the Confederation was watching wasn't just military strategy, it was evolution in action. Human creativity and adaptability were locked in combat with machine logic and precision, and the humans were winning through sheer unpredictability. Colonel Martinez's voice came through the speakers as her team reached the central control chamber. We're in the hub's core, beginning final phase of the operation. The swarm's last desperate attempt to stop them involved releasing thousands of mechanical defenders, but it was too late. The nanobots had already spread too far, corrupted too many systems. The great network that had once been the swarm's greatest advantage had become a highway for human sabotage. Reaper Protocol is now at 90% saturation, Hayes announced. "We own their network." Across the galaxy, swarm forces began shutting down or destroying themselves. The mechanical tide that had seemed unstoppable just days before was collapsing from within, brought down by humanity's willingness to become something just as dangerous as their enemies. The war was ending, but the galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. The silence in space was deafening. Where once the Void Swarm's mechanical chorus had filled the void with the sounds of construction and coordination, now there was only the quiet hum of human ships and the occasional crackle of cooling debris. "Admiral." Mitchell stood alone on the observation deck of his flagship, the UES Retribution. The ship that had once been the pride of humanity's fleet now looked like it had been through a meat grinder. Blast marks scarred her hull. Entire sections had been patched with emergency plating, and half her weapon systems were held together by spare parts and engineering prayers. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the graveyard that had once been the Kepler system. Twisted metal from both human and swarm vessels drifted in the darkness, along with the remains of what had been a thriving star system just weeks before. The swarm had stripped 3 planets down to their cores before the humans arrived, leaving nothing but bare rock floating in space. "Sir," came a voice behind him. Lieutenant Commander Hayes approached carefully, his uniform torn and a medical bandage covering half his face. "We're receiving a transmission from Nexus Prime." Mitchell nodded without turning around. "Put it through." Ambassador Keela's image appeared on the portable communication unit, her crystalline features bright with relief and gratitude. Behind her, the celebration on Nexus Prime was visible. Thousands of aliens from dozens of species, cheering and embracing as news of the swarm's defeat spread throughout the galaxy. "Admiral Mitchell," Kella began, her voice thick with emotion, "I don't have words to express our gratitude. You and your people have saved us all. The entire Confederation is forever in humanity's debt." Mitchell finally turned away from the window, and Kella was shocked by what she saw. The man who had arrived just weeks ago, with confidence and determination, now looked like he had aged years and days. His eyes held a weariness that went deeper than simple exhaustion. "We did what needed doing," he replied quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But don't mistake us for heroes, Ambassador. We're just the monsters you called when you needed something worse than your nightmares dealt with." The celebration sounds from Nexus Prime seemed to fade as Kella processed his words. Around the observation deck, other human officers moved like ghosts, their movements mechanical and precise, but lacking the energy they had shown during the battles. Captain Thompson limped onto the deck, his left arm in a medical sling and his uniform stained with oil and blood. His ship, the UES Vengeance, was barely holding together. Whole sections of her hull had been replaced with whatever materials the engineering teams could find. Admiral Thompson reported, "We're ready for departure. What's left of the fleet, anyway?" Mitchell nodded, then looked back at Ambassador Kella's image. "We'll be heading home now. The swarm's central intelligence is scattered, their construction capabilities destroyed. The survivors have retreated into dark space beyond our sensor range. They won't be bothering you again anytime soon." "But surely you'll stay," Kella protested. "Help us rebuild. Share your knowledge with our scientists. Allow us to properly thank." "No." Mitchell's response was firm, but not unkind. "We've done enough damage for one lifetime." As the communication ended, Observer Nim worked frantically at her recording station, trying to capture everything she had witnessed over the past weeks. Her final report would become required reading at every military academy in the Confederation, but she struggled to find words for what she had seen. The human fleet began forming up for the jump to hyperspace, and Nim could see the true cost of their victory. Of the 50 warships that had arrived to help, only 23 remained operational. The others were either destroyed completely or so damaged they had to be abandoned. But it wasn't just the ships that bore scars. Every human face she could See on her monitors looked different now, harder, more distant. They had arrived as warriors and protectors, but they were leaving as something else entirely. The Deathworlders didn't bring aid. Nim spoke into her recorder, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and sadness. They brought themselves, and that made all the difference. The human fleet's jump drives began charging, creating brilliant flashes of light against the darkness. One by one, the vessels that had saved the galaxy disappeared into hyperspace. Heading back toward their quarantined home system, Captain Rodriguez was among the last to leave, his heavily damaged cruiser barely maintaining life support. As his ship prepared to jump, he opened a final communication to the Confederation forces still cleaning up the battlefield. "Take care of yourselves out here," he said simply. "And remember, sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become something worse." The last human ship vanished into hyperspace, leaving the Confederation alone with their victory and their thoughts. The galaxy was safe, the Void Swarm was defeated, and countless billions of lives had been saved. But everyone who had witnessed the humans in action understood a fundamental truth now. There were things in the universe far more dangerous than mechanical swarms or alien invasions. Sometimes the most dangerous thing of all was calling for help and getting exactly what you asked for. The quarantine around the Sol system remained in place. But now the Confederation knew it wasn't just to protect the galaxy from humanity. It was also to protect humanity from having to become monsters again. In the end, the humans had saved everyone, but the price of that salvation would haunt the galaxy for generations to come. Retriclod can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.